I picked up a bunch of pumpkins from Dollar Tree in all shapes and sizes, and today I'm sharing several ideas of how you can make these over to fit your home decor this fall. I'm going to put these into groups as much as I can, creating a few different pumpkins before sharing the end results. That way this video isn't too crazy long. For this first pumpkin, I'm taking a Dollar Tree hula skirt and making braids. This pumpkin is going to have tons of layers to it using different materials, including the Dollar Tree summer hats, raffia, jute, mesh tubing, nautical rope, macrame, and some paper stems. I should have painted the pumpkin in a tan or neutral color before starting, but didn't think about that, so this took a lot of layers to cover up that orange, and I can still see it a little bit, but this is good enough. The second pumpkin in this set is made with brown paper lunch bags and one of the large orange styrofoam pumpkins. Probably used 5 lunch bags. You want to cut the bags widthwise into about 1.5 to 2 inch strips. And I just eyeballed it and then cut those sections in half lengthwise. Then you want to open up each square and start twisting while crumpling the paper a little bit. And repeat that for all of the little squares. This time I remembered to paint the pumpkin so the orange doesn't show through, and I hot glued the paper strips down around the pumpkin. Most of the stems I left as is, but for this one I wrapped twine around the green styrofoam. For this pumpkin, I'm removing that checkered fabric, covering and basically just recovering it in a different material. I'm using the Dollar Tree faux leather to cover this one. Now I know Dollar Tree is selling already covered faux leather pumpkins this year, but not all stores carry the same things, and the popular items are sold out so quickly. So if you can't find one, just make your own. This material is kind of thick, so it was a little difficult towards the end, but I just kept working with it and stretching it, hot gluing it down to the center. The next pumpkin in this set is super easy. I'm taking half wood beads and gluing them onto the surface, and then painted everything white. Once the paint's dry, I took a dark wax over the surface. I actually think this would have looked a little bit better with a beige paint dry brush, but either way, this set is complete. Blue and white really doesn't fit into my home decor, but I think this is one of my favorite sets. I'm taking a styrofoam pumpkin and painting it white. And then I have this decoupage paper with sketched florals on it. I used a wet paintbrush to rip the pieces I want off. I like ripping the paper because then it just blends right into your piece. To attach the paper, I'm using a liquid patina by DIY Paint and going section by section. I did have to rip some spots so it would wrap around the pumpkin a little bit better, but I just love this paper so much. For the next one, I'm making a velvet pumpkin using ribbon. You could also use a pillowcase. This one's from IKEA. I was trying to find fat quarters in velvet fabric, but couldn't seem to find anything like that. So I cut the ribbon into strips long enough to wrap around the pumpkin. This ribbon has wire in it, so I also cut off the wire edges, but don't throw those away, we still need them. And I also cut each ribbon piece in half. Then I hot glued each piece around the pumpkin, slightly overlapping the one before it. Then I took those edge pieces and added them onto the pumpkin to give it a little bit more dimension. I did make a fabric pumpkin for this set also, but didn't show that because this video is long enough already and it was the same process as the leather pumpkin. Okay, for this next set, I'm starting with these more plastic coated pumpkins and going to add some raised elements. First, I'm using my DAS air dry clay and an IOD lock and key mold. This mold has some really beautiful filigree pieces that I love. While the clay was still wet, I cut the pieces in half to fit around the pumpkin a little better and glued them down with my Titebond multi-surface glue. When the clay was dry, I took some gold paint to paint the pieces, but that was a little too bright for me, so I did go back over it with my dark wax. For the next one, I want to create a raised stencil, but you could also use Dollar Tree stickers to make this go a little bit quicker. I'm going to use the self-adhesive stencils in my Dixie Belle mud. Spackle or joint compound would work just as well. I also found these tools in the cake decorating section at Dollar Tree, and they're absolutely perfect for projects like this. These particular stencils are seriously thin. I was only able to use them a few times before they were ruined, and I had to throw them away. But I applied it to the pumpkin and put my mud over the top. And while it's still wet, I pulled the stencil off. Now it's not perfect, but it looks pretty good. Then once everything was dry, I painted the pumpkin sage green. And then I put white wax on top to bring out some of those details. For this next one, I'm using one of the large styrofoam pumpkins and painted it white, then I sealed it with a top coat. I'm going to use puff paint, and the last time I did this, the paint had flattened out and absorbed right into the pumpkin, so that sealer is key here. Next, I'm outlining my design on the pumpkin. I'm going for kind of an Aztec-like pattern. And once it's all mapped out, I take my puff paint and go over the lines. Then I applied one more coat of paint so it was all the same color. You could also paint the pumpkin a color and let the puff paint stand out in a contrasting color. For the stem on this one, I wanted to use a light colored branch, but the hole was too big, so I used some clay to fill it in. Now for this one, I'm using a smaller styrofoam pumpkin and also painted it white. I want to add gold leaf, so next I took the adhesive and applied this to the pumpkin where I want the gold leaf to go. You have to let the glue become tacky before applying gold leaf, which takes about 30 minutes. And once it was ready, I started adding my gold leaf where the glue was. I did repeat this a few times wherever I felt like the gold was missing. And then you want to take a paintbrush to clean up any of that loose gold leaf, and that's it for this set. This next set is not made using Dollar Tree pumpkins, but instead making pumpkins with other Dollar Tree supplies, starting with these MDF signs that Dollar Tree has been putting out seasonally. My son helped me to cut them down, and we used 2 full signs, cutting them down into 2 7-inch pieces, 2 5-inch pieces, and 2 3 1/4-inch pieces. And then glued them together and added spackle to all the cracks. This is not necessary, but I wanted them to look like one solid block. I did sand the blocks down to get most of that paint off and then stained them with espresso. Once the stain was dry, I'm taking off-white paint and a chip brush to go over top. But I want the bottom of the blocks to be the dark stain. So towards the bottom, I would dry brush to create a staggered transition between the 2 colors. And it did take 3 coats of paint to cover up that dark stain. Next, I picked up these little paper corners, but again, you could use the Dollar Tree stickers here. I didn't like the bright gold color, so I dabbed some dark wax over them to tone it down a little bit, and then glued the corners onto the bottoms of the blocks. I didn't go all the way around the blocks though, just put 4 on each one for the sides that would be most visible. And last, I just added a stick to the top, which of course I forgot to record. This next one is Pinterest inspired, and I also saw Sammy from Unicorn Dust Designs create the same thing recently, but it is perfect for using that Dollar Tree metal ribbon. I'm using two different ribbon designs for mine, and I actually think I made these more complicated than they needed to be. I cut 6 strips from each ribbon spool when I should have cut 3 longer pieces, but oh well. Then to attach the pieces, I'm using my Starbond super glue. So here's why it would have been easier to cut 3 pieces instead. I ended up gluing all the pieces together at the bottom, having to overlap the ends. And that made the bottom and the top pretty bulky, where you would have eliminated some of that and been able to put this together quicker with only 3 pieces. I did the same thing with the second metal ribbon, but made a smaller pumpkin. And then I'm taking my rub and buff over the top since silver doesn't really fit my home decor, and sorry this is very out of frame. I believe I also added a dark wax on top of the rub and buff. Next I'm using these vintage knobs that I found on vacation this summer for the stem and gluing them down. Last, to keep the pumpkins standing upright, I glued a tiny wood circle to the bottom. I did not embellish the tops any further, but you certainly could. This one may be controversial. I'm taking a Dollar Tree paperback book and removing the cover. I actually end up grabbing one of the books that I already have on hand that I know I'm not going to read again instead, because this brand new book was a little bit too stiff. But next I need to cut the book down a bit and used my X-Acto knife to do that. I wanted to use the cut portion as well to make another different book pumpkin, but I just ran out of time for this video. Here's where I swapped the book out because the spine was not bending enough the way I needed it to. Now I'm taking sections of the book and bending them inwards towards each other. You want to be careful not to crease the pages. I did do that a little bit on the first few, just round them in toward the spine. Then to attach the pages, I'm using a glue roller which has double-sided tape, and repeat that around the whole book. Next I took some orange paint and lightly dry brushed over the pages. I don't want to cover up any of the words and take away from this being a book, just want to give it some color. Then I'm using a dark paint to splatter on the bottom of the pages and tied a piece of macrame around it. For the stem, I'm using a scrap piece left over from that lunch bag pumpkin earlier. Oops, this next one is made from a Dollar Tree pumpkin, but I thought it fit in with this set. I had painted a pumpkin white and sealed it with a top coat, and then I'm taking various Dollar Tree rub-on transfers to put all around it. This one is super easy. And for the last one in this set, I'm taking the Dollar Tree dominoes from the toy aisle and painted them orange. Then I gave them a very heavy dry brush of white paint, only leaving a little bit of that orange showing through. When the paint was dry, I'm taking a piece of dowel and gluing the dominoes all around it. Then I added a stick for the stem, and that's it for this set. Alright, we're on the last set, and these are my least favorite, but I'll start with the one that I semi-like. So I took one of the larger pumpkins and painted it black and then sealed it with a top coat. I wanted to do a mercury glass look and have this mirror spray paint, which is why I sealed it first. I started adding the mirror spray paint and dabbed the pumpkin because I wanted an aged look, and repeated that a few times. To get a mercury glass look, you want to use a mix of either bleach and water or vinegar and water, and spray the area you don't want the mirror to be. I didn't want the bleach to sit on the pumpkin for too long and ruin it, but it really wasn't doing much at all. Plus it was too hot outside. Everything was drying way too quick, so I had to go inside. And I added more of the water mix, and this time let it sit while spraying very light the brass spray paint and then dabbing it all off. That was working better, but still not giving me the black spot poking through like I wanted. So then I took a sponge and dabbed black paint on the top, and I like how that looked much better. These last two are womp womp, not so good. Again, I was going for that aged patina look and wanted to use this patina paint that I have. I used iron on one and initially used bronze on the second, but went back and changed that to copper. When working with patina paint, you want to add one layer of paint, let that dry, and then with the second layer, while it's still wet, you add the patina spray. So that's what I did. I was trying to make the iron one look rusted, which did show up, but it was only slightly there. And the bronze or copper paint will have either the blue patina or green patina, depending on the spray you use. I also find that dabbing the spray on works much better unless you like that drip look. And there you have it, guys, 16 different styles of pumpkins using mostly Dollar Tree supplies. So I hope you got some inspiration out of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.